The coffin had barely touched the ground when the silence broke him, not the kind of silence that honors the dead, but the kind that sharpens into judgment, that hums with accusation and betrayal. As the cold earth waited to swallow his father, the people who shared his blood slowly turned their backs on him, one by one, as if grief had given them permission to finally show where their loyalties truly lay. He stood there alone, a single father holding the weight of loss in his chest, while his own family decided he was the villain at his father's funeral. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us how fragile family truly is, please take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that are quietly breaking. He had arrived at the cemetery early that morning, long before most of the mourners. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of rain, and the wind moved through the trees like a restless spirit. He adjusted the collar of his worn black coat, the same one he had worn to job interviews that never seemed to go anywhere, and glanced down at the small hand clinging to his. His daughter stood close, her eyes too serious for her age, her grip firm as if she sensed that this place was dangerous in a way she could not yet name. He had promised her they would be strong together, no matter what happened, and he meant it with every exhausted part of himself. His father had been the only one who never doubted him. When his marriage collapsed under the weight of misunderstandings and resentment, when his ex-wife walked away and took half the family's trust with her, it was his father who opened his door without questions. It was his father who watched him learn how to braid hair, pack lunches, and survive sleepless nights while pretending everything was fine. Losing that anchor felt like being cut loose at sea, and standing at the funeral made the loss final in a way nothing else had. As the rest of the family arrived, he felt the shift immediately. Eyes that once held warmth now slid past him. Shoulders turned away. Whispered words floated through the air, sharp enough to sting even without being fully heard. His siblings stood together, forming a quiet wall that excluded him. Aunts and uncles nodded politely but kept their distance. It was as if an invisible verdict had already been passed, and no one felt the need to explain it to him. The story they believed was simple and cruel. They believed his ex-wife. They believed the version where he was careless, selfish, irresponsible. They believed he had driven her away and burdened his father with his failures. No one asked how many nights he had gone without eating so his daughter could have enough. No one asked how many times he had swallowed his pride to keep his child safe. Grief has a way of making people choose sides, and his family had chosen the easiest one. As the service unfolded, he focused on breathing. He focused on keeping his daughter calm as the priest spoke words about legacy and love that felt painfully ironic. When it came time for the final prayers, he noticed that no one stood beside him. Even his mother, overwhelmed by her own sorrow and guided by the louder voices around her, avoided his eyes. The isolation pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating, and for a moment he wondered if this was how it would always be, standing alone while being blamed for things that were never fully his fault. After the burial, the tension snapped completely. Relatives moved away from him, conversations stopping abruptly when he came near. Plates of food at the reception hall seemed to empty before he reached them, and the air felt thick with judgment. His daughter tugged on his sleeve, confused by the sudden coldness, and he forced a smile that hurt his face. He told himself that today was about honoring his father, not defending himself, but the injustice burned all the same. He left early, before the rain finally fell. In the car, with his daughter asleep against his shoulder, the grief he had been holding back poured out. He cried silently, shaking, feeling the full weight of being abandoned by the very people who were supposed to understand him best. He wondered how he would explain the state to his daughter someday, how he would teach her about family without bitterness seeping into his words. Life did not slow down to give him time to heal. Bills still arrived. Work was still uncertain. Parenting still demanded energy he barely had. Without his father's quiet support, everything felt harder. Yet, something shifted inside him during those lonely weeks. He stopped waiting for his family's approval. He focused on building a small, steady life for himself and his child. one routine at a time. Mornings became about shared breakfasts and gentle laughter. Evenings became about homework at the kitchen table and stories before bed. It was not glamorous, but it was real, and it was theirs. Months passed, and the absence of his family became a familiar ache rather than an open wound. Then, slowly, cracks began to appear in the story they had believed. His ex-wife, unable to maintain the image she had created, started to unravel under the weight of her own contradictions. Details she had exaggerated began to surface. Small lies collided with each other. People who had once listened to her so eagerly started to question things they had never bothered to verify. The first call came from a distant cousin who had always been kinder than the rest. It was awkward and hesitant, filled with apologies that arrived too late but still mattered. Then an aunt reached out, admitting she might have judged too quickly. Each conversation reopened old pain, but it also brought a strange sense of validation. He had lived his truth quietly, without witnesses, and now the truth was finding its way out on its own. The turning point came when a letter surfaced, one his father had written shortly before he passed. It was addressed to the family, meant to be read if he was no longer there to speak for himself. In it, his father described the pride he felt watching his son grow into a devoted parent. He wrote about the sacrifices he had seen, the patience, the love. He made it clear that the blame placed on his son was unfair and rooted in convenience rather than reality. The letter spread through the family like a shockwave. Shame replaced certainty. Regret replaced judgment. Suddenly, the people who had turned their backs at the funeral wanted forgiveness. They wanted to reconnect, to explain, to justify. When they reached out, he listened, but he did not rush. He understood now that forgiveness did not mean forgetting, and reconciliation did not mean returning to the same place as before. What surprised him most was his own strength. The man who had stood alone at his father's grave now knew who he was without anyone else's approval. He had built a life from the ground up, guided by love rather than resentment. When he finally allowed some of his family back in, it was on new terms, with clear boundaries and quiet honesty. His daughter watched all of this with observant eyes. She saw her father choose patience over anger, dignity over revenge. She learned that love could be firm and gentle at the same time. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from their small apartment window, he felt a sense of peace he had not known before. The pain of the funeral would always be there, but it no longer defined him. The family never fully recovered from what they had done, and perhaps they never should. Some wounds leave scars that remind us to be careful, to listen better, to love more responsibly. But out of that painful day grew something unexpected. A man who learned that being alone did not mean being weak, and a child who learned what resilience looks like in its truest form. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive and reaching people who feel unseen. Before the video ends, we have a special request for you. Please comment below and tell us what this story made you feel, or share a moment when you had to stand alone for what was right. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. At his father's grave 1 year later, he returned quietly, just him and his daughter. The cemetery was calm, bathed in soft light, and the wind no longer felt hostile. He placed fresh flowers on the headstone and stood tall, no longer broken by the memory of betrayal. He had survived the turning away, the judgment, the loneliness, and he had come out stronger, guided by love and integrity. And in that quiet moment, he knew that his father's greatest legacy was not the family name or approval, but the strength to keep going when everyone else walks away.